It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod.
Hello, and welcome to the Sod Pod. This is episode 3 of season 3, our Tillage special. John O'Loughlin and Ed Healy caught up with Shay Phelan, Tillage, a potato crop specialist based in Teagasc, Oakpark. Have a listen.
Today we're joined here by Shay Phelan of Teagasc. Shay's title is Tillage and Potato Crop Specialist. You're based in Oakpark, Shay, isn't that right?
That's right, Ed, yeah. Here in Carlow, yeah.
You're very welcome to the Sod Pod, and we're also joined by John O'Loughlin. I think both of you know each other from when John was doing one of his multiple PhDs back in his Oakpark days. Is that right, John?
That's right. So, no, thanks, Mary Shay. Thanks for coming on. It's great to have you, I suppose. It's a very tricky climate there for tillage farmers and advisors as well. So it's great to have you on. I think it's very timely.
No problem, lads. No problem at all.
You're up the walls at the moment, Shay.
Yeah, it's busy. I mean, it's probably been one of the busiest January and February's I can remember, like for all the reasons that we'll be talking about. Poor winter crops. What are we going to do with them? Is there going to be enough seed in the country? So on and so forth. So there's a lot of issues out there at the moment, and we've been on a kind of tour, if you like, in the last 3 weeks on seminars and stuff like that. So it's been interesting to hear different situations, and it's tough going for a lot of people now, to be honest.
I suppose we're coming off the back of a tough 2023 in general for farming, and it's been a tough start to the year in terms of 2024 for winter crops especially. And I know you gave a talk at the National Tillage Conference a couple of weeks ago, I suppose, discussing crops that have gone in there, patchy crops. Probably the seed end of it being scarce was another massive topic that's probably adding to the problem. I suppose just to give a little bit of a brief summary of what's going on out there at the moment there, would you talk us a little bit through that and maybe what you're seeing on the ground and some practical steps that guys can take when they're looking at patchy crops?
Yeah, it's you're right. I mean, there's a lot of problems out there now. It's not everywhere, but where there are problems, there's significant problems. So really, I suppose we've had probably one of the wettest 6 months that I can certainly remember, from July all the way through to December, if you like. So that has had a huge knock-on effect in terms of establishment rates of winter cereals and the planting rate. So we reckon we had, at the time when we were getting ready for the conference, we were hoping that there would be somewhere in around 35,000 hectares of winter wheat and about another 35,000 hectares of winter barley. Now, we're hoping that there might be a little bit more winter wheat gone in, but that doesn't look like it's going to be the case now. So we could be as low as about 30,000 hectares of winter wheat, which is about half where it should be. So, and on top of that then, what is in the ground, there's a fair proportion of it now is not in good nick. Now, it's not all bad, but there's areas within fields, and we would have had two farmers who would have shown us their examples of their fields at the Tillage Conference, one from Wexford and one from Wicklow. And, fair play to them for doing that, because, quite often it's not nice to show people the problems that you're having. But I suppose the one comfort, if it's any comfort at all, is that we're all in the same boat, really. Yeah, so really what I was talking about on the conference is about what do you do with these crops and how do you manage them. And I suppose, again, the first thing you need to do is to get out and to walk all the fields and have a look and see what's there. Get a plant count done on them. Simple way to do is just get a metre long stick, count how many rows are in that metre, then count along a row and see how many plants are in that row and multiply one by the other. That gives you how many plants you have per metre square. And do that in a couple of different places across the field. And that then can kind of form your decision of what you're going to do with that field. Or, I suppose, in general cases, it's not a whole field. It's areas within the field. And this is where the real problem lies. I mean, we would have seen Tom Nolan down in Wexford, down in Timon, and there were stripes in his field. So, it wasn't areas within the field. So it wasn't a square area, a square acre or a square hectare, whatever it was. It was bits and patches of ball patches and stuff like that. They're incredibly frustrating to try and deal with, because in your heart and soul it's not going to pay you to take those out. But you also know in your heart and soul they're not going to give you a full yield. So that's the conundrum most people are facing. Like, I would see some areas where maybe there might be low-lying areas down near a river and the whole headland is gone. That decision is easy made. If the ground comes right, you just re-drill it. But in other areas where you have patches within crops that are weak or gone, do you now take those out?
Yeah.
And I suppose the question I'd have to ask you is it a recurring problem in those areas, or is it a once-off, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a recurring issue in those areas, chances are there's more than just this year's weather is the problem. They may be low-lying, they may be subject to, there may be a broken drain, there could be something like that in it. And re-drilling that area in that circumstance with what's likely to be scarce spring seed is probably not a good idea. So I suppose from that point of view, I know I would have seen it before as well. People, they do like full crops because, obviously bare patches don't yield, but it has to be down to economics. And one of the points I was getting across, or trying to get across at the conference, is that you've already put in seed into the ground, you've already cultivated that crop and ploughed it or whatever cultivation system you've used. So you've already incurred costs in those areas. And is it feasible that a crop of spring barley, which is the most likely, will actually give you a return for your time, your effort, and your labour? And in a lot of cases, that's probably not going to happen. So, that's kind of where we're at. It's a very, very difficult conversation to have with farmers. It's a very difficult decision to make with them as well. So, but each individual field, never mind each individual farm, each individual field is different. And you can only make those decisions on a field-by-field basis.
The winter wheat, is the window closed now for sowing winter wheat? Like, what's the cut-off point for winter wheat in the turn of the year?
Normally, you would say today. I know in previous years, it's not for the faint-hearted, if you like. I've seen fellas do it up as far as the 1st of March. But you're looking at Graham, the likes of Dawson's out. Dawson is a slow developing variety. So Graham is probably the one I would pick of choice.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the faster developing ones as such. But like I say, it's not for the faint-hearted. I wouldn't be encouraging people to do it. It would be, if there's no other option, or they can't get spring seed or something like that, or there's nothing else that they can do. It's not maybe spring barley ground, which would be the case in a lot of counties in the northeast, certainly areas of it in the northeast. And some of those farmers would have got stung with spring barley last year, especially late sown spring barley. So, yeah, I've seen it before, where, like I say, where guys have done up to 1st of March.
Yeah,
but
the exception rather than the rule, probably.
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing just to be aware of with that is those crops are incredibly slow to develop.
Yes.
So they will be very slow to get going. They'll be very slow to tiller, and they will be very slow to get into that reproductive stage. Richie Hackett would have done trials here in Oakpark, and he would have shown some of those whereby, some of those late sown March sowing dates, you could have flowering sometime in the middle of July, which leaves grain fills period very, very short. So the later you sow it, the later you're going to have flowering, the lower the yields you're going to have.
So the plant count numbers that we're looking for across maybe winter barley and winter wheat, could you give us an outline of what we need to see to say, listen, we're not too bad, although it might look bad, but we're not as bad as we think? Yeah,
we were looking at some of these here in Oakpark yesterday. For winter barley, for 2 rows, you're probably looking at somewhere in the region of about 100 to 150 plants per square metre. If you're in that sort of ballpark, given the year that you're in, I'd stick with them. 2 rows probably go a little bit lower, maybe down to low 100s. Winter wheat would be the same, low 100s. But 2-row winter barleys are probably the ones that you'd be kind of most nervous of, because, the tillering is where you get your yield from, and that early tiller developer, number of heads that you have, so on. 6 rows have a huge capacity to tiller if there's enough light and nutrition. And winter wheat, by its nature, generally can compensate later on for low plant counts. So they're the kind of figures I'd be kind of looking at. Now, that said, we would have seen a trial in 2018, some from
Garris,
trials, but Garris was lower than 100, and it still yielded pretty okay. But
didn't look great. Didn't look great in the slide now, to be fair. But
But
and was that just a particular variety though, Shay? Because I think it
was Garris that year, and there was a problem with the seed, and now they were drilled, all the plots were drilled. And we ended up, I think, establishing somewhere between 60 and 80 plants on average a square metre, but they were evenly spaced out.
Yeah.
So that's the big conundrum you have, that a lot of these crops, that isn't the case. There's bare patches. So, you need probably to do 3 or 4, maybe 5 plant counts in an area and see what your average is then, and then go with that.
Shay, one of the points at the conference as well was that maybe to look at your input costs and controlling your input costs, and especially on fertilizer. And I suppose the advice was maybe to go with 20% less fertilizer. Is there a case maybe to be made for 20% reduction in nitrogen? And maybe if there's people have taken their foot off the gas in relation to P&K, or maybe on low fertility ground, to maybe still tip on the P&K a little bit, or maybe not to reduce as much so that you have some chance? Or what's your own thoughts?
There's two views on this, John, to be honest, right? So what I was looking at the day of the conference was purely on economics, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have to look at the costs, the variable costs, say for a crop of winter wheat, about €1,700 a hectare, right?
Yeah.
So if we're only going to yield maybe 7.5 tons, price of wheat at the moment is what? It's about €190 a ton.
Yeah.
So that's not economic, all right?
Yeah.
So if you're reducing your input costs by about 20%, we were hoping to get them down somewhere, I think, somewhere, if memory serves me, about €1,500. It's not altogether 20%. It's just fertilizer and fungicides where we could see the areas that we could cut back. At 7.5 tons, you need €200 a ton to break even on those crops, not including your straw costs. But you're getting there, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I suppose, and you're right to point to it, that given the high price of fertilizer that would have been there last year and the year before, some farmers might have been encouraged to take, or might have decided to take a P&K holiday, right?
Mm.
And in that case, they may have drawn down their P&K levels in their soil. So if you're on, say, owned land, or you're on land that's on long-term leases or something like that, fertilizer at the moment, dare I say it, is relatively good value compared to where it was the last 2 years.
And
there's no guarantee it'll be lower next year. So it may well be worth your while to feed that crop, or feed the soil there, try and build a little bit for the next coming years. But you don't know what way prices are going to be next year.
No, it's so volatile. But it's so volatile.
The other thing you're probably looking at really is if you have a patchy crop there, you're probably not going to get the uptake of nitrogen at 100% when you're what you're spreading, So it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I think in the climate we're in at the moment, lads, that where especially on the tillage soils that tend to be more leaky, and we're in the crosshairs for all this nitrogen that's ending up in water and in rivers and stuff like that, especially the Barrow, the Slaney, and the Nore. We can't be just going out throwing nitrogen onto bare ground, No,
it's too expensive, Shay, and it's irresponsible. Like all of us, we want to grow the tillage area, not create any reasons to, or any, I suppose, nutrient losses as a result of it. So it's really important we're responsible with the nutrients we use. I think it's going to be a crop by crop basis on the specifics, working with your own agronomist and taking your plant counts in as well, Shay, for the specific fertilizer program.
I suppose like some good news there. I suppose the department probably haven't decided to take away any payments for some of those patchy crops. From what I've seen there, the kind of, they're going to keep the basic payment scheme intact, and the strong cooperation scheme, or the sustainability scheme, and the strong cooperation scheme for those farmers. Are not going to penalise them for having those patchy crops there, which is probably is a positive move.
It is a good thing. I don't know the exact details of it yet, but one of the issues that certainly came up last year was the whole area of AgriSnap and what comes up on satellites and satellite imagery. So look, that probably still has to be ironed out yet. But it is good news that they're not going to penalise. That they're going to.
I'm not trying to promote, but it definitely came. The Tillage conference came at the right time, and it was a really strong message out of the Tillage conference that like everyone is in a really bad place, and we have to try and come to some sort of common sense approach. So,
and to be fair to the Department of Agriculture, I mean they do, and I mean they do come to the table and they do look at the issues that are out there, and they do react. To be fair, sometimes I think they get a little bit of a bad rap. Now, look, sometimes you kind of say they deserve it, but I kind of find a lot of times where farmers are really put to the pin in their collar, they do react.
No, they do
try to
stand
protect
up, and this is another example of that. I think, Shay, you're right. And you're right to give them credit, because sometimes we don't enough in the industry, and like we are reliant on them as well. So no, it's really, really positive to see that come, and I think the farmers coming up to the plate. For me, as as someone attending the conference, I love the fact that there was farmers there telling their stories, and that they were brave enough and honest about where they were, and I think it really resonated with everyone in the room as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and that's why it was designed that way, because we really, I suppose, the idea of the conference to try and solve problems, or maybe not solve problems, but help farmers with their problems, and I think that came through on the day, and that's very much what we're trying to achieve.
The other thing, I suppose, is from a soil health point of view, which obviously we work on in Grassland Agro, is this will have a knock. So we've taken them two parts. What are your options in relation to cropping if you don't have those winter crops sown? And what effect will that have on your rotation? And how do we need to be maybe thinking about it, rather than just saying, okay, I got my hands on load of spring barley seed, I'm going to set it everywhere. Like, do we need to be thinking a little bit more long term?
Oh, absolutely. And the two farmers that were talking on the day, Tom Short and Tom Nolan, they were at pains to explain that they're looking for an option that's going to fit in with their current rotation. If you take the winter wheat, for example, right, and this is where it kind of gets a little bit tricky for farmers. Most of the winter wheat that's going in the country now is grown as a first wheat after a break crop, right?
Yeah.
There's very, very little of it grown as a second or continuous wheat, right? So by that nature, it's coming in after predominantly something like beans or peas or oilseed rape, or maybe even beet or potatoes in some cases. Okay, so that cereal slot is where those cereals were planted. So the natural inclination then would put another cereal back in there. So for that point of view, that's fine, provided you can get your hands on the seed. And this is not a given. And especially some of the seed that's coming in, we don't know what the germination is like going to be in it. We don't know how far it's going to stretch, and I suppose that's the key one. So yeah, it is certainly something that if you're in a cereal crop, if you've planted a cereal crop in the autumn, the likelihood is you're going to try and put another cereal crop in there, whether it be wheat or barley. Oats obviously is the other one that's out there again, but again, there's wheat after oats as well. So it depends on each individual situation as to which crop you decide you match in or you patch in those fields that are gone. To my mind, for the most part, it'll be either spring wheat or spring barley. There are talks of guys putting in maybe like some spring oilseed rape, beans, peas, but again, if you're 2 or 3 years out from those crops previously, they're not an option. So, and again, you have to be thinking 2, 3, 4 or 5 years down the line, where do they fit into the rotation in 24 or 25, 26 or 27? And you could be cutting your nose off to spite your face by going with those crops now. So, it's not as straightforward either. You don't plant a cereal to go with a break crop. It's not just as simple as that, and people need to be aware of that.
I think it's a very important point. I know Tim Donovan said that the spring oilseed rape was fairly consistent, but that'll have a knock-on effect somewhere down the line in relation to chemistry and stuff like that, and volunteers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose, fortunately, there's no shortage of challenges out there. Whether it's deciding what other crops to go in with, or we've had the introduction of the fertilizer register in here this year as well. And we're seeing it on our end, as well as the good work that you're doing on the ground, trying to do the nutrient management and things. We're trying to do a huge amount of it on the planning end of it as well. I don't know on the nutrient management end of things. Are you seeing a lot of confusion out there in terms of allowances, and I suppose where people should be going with their P's and K's going forward, and especially in a difficult year like this, or do you see most farmers there actually knowing what they're actually allowed to spread?
A little bit of both, to be honest with you, Ed. I mean, tillage farmers by their nature are probably the best in class, I'd imagine, in terms of planning their fertilizer requirements, right? And they're probably best in class for doing soil tests as well. And I suppose if you start off with your basics first, most of them will go and get a certain level of soil testing done. And based on that, then I would have, as an advisor years ago, you would have given advice based on what was on that soil test. Now, you could argue your nitrogen limits and stuff like that, you would kind of you're kind of a little bit up in the air based on the field, based on the history, so on and so forth. But you were generally within the ballpark, right? But what the nutrient management planning process has done now on the back of the fertilizer register is formalised that, so people actually know what they need, how much to buy, so on and so forth. And I think that's a good thing, right? I know it's a pain in the backside to have to go through it, and I have huge sympathy for all the advisors across the country, not only our own, but everybody else, merchant reps, everybody else that are having to do this. But to put it in context, I was in Denmark last summer. They're at this since the mid-90s, this type of work, because they had to protect water quality. And I think at the end of the day, if we're always kind of promoting the tillage sector as being best in class in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of nutrient loss and nitrogen use efficiency, and so on and so forth. And if we're to continue to do that, we do need to be, planning our fertilizer strategies as best as we possibly can. So look, I know there's a huge amount of volume of work out there at the moment, and it's putting huge pressure on the system. But look, I think at the long run, it's probably for the better.
Shay, can you grow a crop of spring barley on an Index 4 without any P, in your experience?
It's a good question. You can.
I know it's a very straight question, but a lot of lads are very nervous, and you were having these questions as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of nuances within that, John. Right. So where I am around here in Carlow and into Bagleystown and up into high places like that, you're in high pHs. Okay, so you have lockup. All right. And basically what happens there is the P is not readily available. Now, within that, you do have that allowance where you can put out 20 kilos of P on your land to make that P available.
Yeah, it's a kickstart,
Yeah, it's a kickstart. But in the scenario where you're in, say, pH of 6 to 6.5 or somewhere like that, the soil samples, will tell you that it's possible to do it. And in my experience, yeah, it probably is. Now, like that, within that, you will get variations within soils, and you might have a lower soil pH in some places where you do get a little bit of lockup at the other end. So, you can suffer peel or yield penalties on the back of that. But, I mean, we have to trust in the science, right?
Exactly.
And if a soil test tells you that, you're Index 4, the crop doesn't need any P, you don't have the issues of lockup, well, then by all manner of means, you should be able to grow a crop of spring barley on an Index 4 soil.
It's a big one, though, as well, Shay, because, the tillage sector is a front runner in so many areas. I could describe nitrogen use efficiency, probably P use efficiency, maybe not as good. So it is possible. I've seen it crops that have grown no bother, and it's just important maybe just to put people at ease, because maybe they're used to going with the couple of bags of compounds into the seed bed. But as you said, trust the science, follow the science. Like the team there, I know Marcus moved slightly into a different role, but Dave Wall and all the team in Johnstown, they have a huge body of research there to back this up. And it's not just, and this is from a fertilizer company as well. And
I suppose what we have to realise is that the soil test that has been developed here, Morgan's P soil test for phosphorus, that's been developed with Irish soils in mind. That's where it's suitable for. Like you will hear other Olson's P, which is designed for high pH soils in the UK. Yeah. So you have to trust that the science that's here is based on the native soils that we're dealing with here in Ireland. So if they're able to, and it's going back, it's a robust set of research. It's going back 40, 50, 60 years now at this stage. So, I mean, like I say, that's where they've been developed, so you have to trust the science.
And even sure the index system is slightly different as well. For maybe some of the listeners are in grass, so in tillage, the index system is slightly different. So you're into 10 milligrams per litre when you get into an index 4. So that's designed with that in mind to give you the best chance. So really, if you're over 10 parts per million, you should be the solid finds.
Yes, exactly.
The thing going forward is probably we're probably going to have to, we will have to pay a lot more attention to our soil sample results, because no soil samples for tillage ground means no P allowance going forward. So look, I think even looking at previous yields, there is extra ways to get extra phosphorus, and if you are achieving extra yields over the base, there is allowances for that sort of thing. And look, what I'd say to anyone out there is that if anyone is unsure on what they're actually allowed to spread, don't be afraid to get onto your local Teagasc advisor, or don't be afraid to get onto your local Grass and Agro rep, who can actually help with the planning process and try and show you how much you are actually allowed out there.
Yeah, probably, and dare I say it now, it's probably going to be controversial, but to a certain degree, fertilizer was probably a little bit too cheap, and pellets were throwing this out anyway, regardless, so it's when fertilizer and resources become expensive, that's when people start to really look at the science and say, well, listen, I need to get value for my money here, so.
There's a neighbour of yours, Shay, in the McDonald, he works with us, and he said when the nitrates first come around, lads were saying that it was impossible to grow a crop of spring barley without 4 bags of 10-10-20, and there has been an evolution, and we need to respect these nutrients because they're expensive, but also from a water quality point of view.
Yeah, and I'd even move it on a step further. I mean, there's probably an education piece has to be done around the use of organic manures as well. And it's become a huge issue, and it's one of the topics that will be talked about at the conference.
Yeah.
That some sectors need to get rid of it off their farms, and we probably can take some of it. So it's certainly an area, and I know it's probably going against fertilizer companies to a certain degree, but it's certainly an area whereby we need to be looking at more and looking at the value of those slurries, because certainly certain farmers are throwing it out like a waste, throwing it onto crops when there's no growth, no use for it,
and
it's ending up in rivers.
Shay, I was delighted at the Dairy Synergies workshop. I'd never seen Lawrence Shalhoub sweat as much. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And the farmer really gave a strong statement on what he expects when he's in that relationship. And I was chatting to Siobhan Walsh a few weeks ago. I said that this has to be farmer driven. It won't be me or you, spoofing away about the benefits, but it's about farmers getting together and using them as ambassadors for this. I'm gonna throw a curveball at you this now, and I didn't. Is there a place maybe for slurry separation? If Lawrence was saying, we don't want to get rid of the P&K off dairy farms. Is that something that could work? Because when you look at it, really positive, but because you have to prove you have the requirement for phosphorus going forward, if this farmer that's taken in the organic manures builds up their P levels, then they essentially go bust if they can't go to maybe get more ground, or maybe the optics will solve that. Maybe site fertility is good enough, but as you said, a set of soil samples from a cereal farmer or a veg farmer are generally an awful lot better now than a dairy or dry stock farmer. So is there maybe something in that, or is it too far away? We need to get
probably, I suppose, it comes down to cost, really, right?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at separation, there's a huge cost in that. And one of the things that Lawrence was talking about on the day was the cost of transporting slurries, which is an issue. But certainly they've looked at other European countries, and to the best of my knowledge now, and don't quote me, and I'm not an expert on this, they found that it's too expensive. So they're actually transporting slurries longer distances now to sites that can take it. But I suppose the other thing we have to kind of look at is that if we're building up our P and K levels too much in our soils, are we over applying them? And that's something I suppose that we need to have a good chat about. Are we going out with our 3,000 gallons of slurry, every year on the same fields every year? And we're not getting the offtakes. So why are we doing that? Would 2,000 or even 1,000 gallons of slurry on that acre be more appropriate? So I suppose that's probably one of the benefits of those fertilizer or nutrient management plans, that you can actually look at that and plan those applications, whether it be chemical fertilizer or organic fertilizer, and plan them to the crop needs, and not blow our limits extreme.
Yeah, not go burst. Yeah, and Shay, one of the things is if you take that organic manure, if you looked at the same, if you apply the exact same quantity in chemical fertilizer, the organic manure will win every time.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is you're supplying carbon as well as new NPK. We quote the available NPK, but there's also another good shot of nitrogen there in the background. So it's just one that you want to take into account for mold and reduce your chemical N applied. But these are really valuable for building your soil organic matter levels in conjunction with cover crop and then straw incorporation as well.
And it's, again, I come back to it, lads, in that I see fellas, as soon as the 15th of January is over, they're out spreading slurry straight away on this year on frozen ground.
Yeah.
To me, that's bonkers. Would they put out 10-10-20 on frozen ground with no growth? I don't think so.
Not a whole.
So I think there's an education piece that has to be done here with farmers and with advisors, and that really that stuff needs to be stored longer. And I know that's a cost, but over time it'll be cheap,
Shay, I done a TikTok there with Adam Woods there earlier. It'll be out on Friday. I'm sure neither of the two of you listened to it anyways. But he was asking me about slurry. He was asking me about slurry, like, and I said I would be interested to get the two of your opinions. That it's nearly like a culture thing with slurry. Like, it's the rules that we have are fine. We don't need more rules. We need to make it socially unacceptable for a lad to go out maybe during the close or when it's frosty or lashing rain. Like, and that has to be farmer driven as well. Not reporting lads, but saying like, jeepers, hold on, like, will you go handy, like, it's like to drink driving, like, previously back in your days, probably back when you were
stuff, and drive away, I'm not admitting to that anyway, by the way, so don't any guard allegedly knock on my door. But no, I think education is the big piece, right? And I think what people have to realise is that nutrients, NPK, are valuable. And slurries, whether it be pig slurry, cattle slurry, whatever it happens to be, contain valuable nutrients. And if those nutrients aren't being taken up by the crop, they're going somewhere. They're either going into a river or they're going up into the atmosphere, one or the other. And that's a loss to the farmer that applies it as much as it is to everybody else, because that farmer has just basically thrown fertilizer down the Swanee. So, and I think that's something that they need to have and they need to learn. And I know the big concern is about having to build all this extra slurry storage. But to my mind, it's a no-brainer. I mean, I would rather, and I have plenty of farmers who've put in extra slurry, or I've come across plenty of farmers who've put in extra slurry storage, and they've reduced down their chemical fertilizer bills to very, very small levels compared to where they were. And if you put that, we tend to look at these things short term, but if you put that over a slurry tank's lifespan is 40, 50 years. If you put it over that, it's a no-brainer. Yeah.
I think just from being on the road there this year, there is a bit of a change in mindset coming. Maybe it's not coming fast enough, but there is more lads thinking about it now at the moment. I mean, I think there's a value on 1,000 gallons of slurry of about €29 per 1,000 gallons at the moment there. So it's quite considerable when you think about what you're throwing away at a time maybe where the plant can't utilise those nutrients, So. Yes. Look, I think with changing regulation and probably smaller and smaller amounts of chemical nitrogen and more pressure on phosphorus going forward, slurry and the organic manures are going to be absolutely massive to try and keep and maintain and growing the crops that we're actually growing at the moment.
Absolutely. And we have a demo actually now, as a shameless plug, I suppose. We'll have a demo on one of our signpost farms in early March. We just don't know the date yet. And he's actually applying cattle slurry direct onto winter wheat and winter barley crops. And I think that's something that's going to become much more popular. Tom Barry, who spoke down at the conference, he's an advocate. He's been doing it for 20 years. Yeah. So, and I think this is something that, there's technologies out there to do this in terms of dribble bars and GPS and all that type of thing. So I think that's something that we should be making a lot more use of over the next number of years.
Definitely. Shay, the Tillage seminars, are they nearly wrapped up now, or is there any?
We have two more, John, if you want to go to them. One is in Offaly in Tullamore next Tuesday night, the 20th. And the last one then of this round is in Donegal, if the lads will pay you to go up to Donegal and get a free hotel up there. We're up in Donegal on the last Thursday of this month, so we're up there. They're the last two. The crop walks are ongoing this week around the country as well. So, and
if guys want to find the dates for any of those crop walks or seminars, the best place to go is probably the Teagasc website, really, is it?
Teagasc website or Teagasc Tillage or Twitter page. So they're on that as well. So any of the social media channels or Teagasc social media channels, they should be on it as well.
What's in the news?
Shay, article here for what's in the news there. How to make best use of glyphosate. I'm just going to quickly go through this one with you now. Will there be a tillage sector where we lose glyphosate?
There was before, so I presume there will be after. Now, brilliant. Luckily, it depends on your viewpoint. We'll have it for another 10 years. So I've got a review there in October last year. Now, I believe there's new rules and regulations about it, and I see something coming from the department there today that we're going to have a chat about it there, I think next week or the week after. So there is probably going to be change to what we've been used to. it's a very important, and once it's vital, it's a very important tool, if you like, and I think that's what we have to look at as a tool for farming, not just in Ireland but all over the world, and that's why it's such a big brand name as it is. Would farming survive without it? Yes. Would it be more difficult? Absolutely. And I think one of the areas I think whereby people will struggle is kind of in the regen sort of farms, the kind of reduced cultivation systems. And to be fair to the protagonists who are using those systems and the advocates of it, they make no bones about it. It's probably one of the key elements of their system. So that's an issue. That's, I suppose, if you're looking at carbon emissions, it depends on what you want to measure and what you want to do. If you're looking at the reduced tillage cultivation systems, they do release less carbon to the atmosphere. Okay. Yeah. So it depends on what your goal is. If you're going into ploughing tends to, now, and I'm not an expert, and Dermot Forrester is probably better qualified to talk about this. If you're ploughing up lay land or lay ground or grassland, you get a big release of carbon immediately. But in all tillage soils, you get less carbon emissions because there's less carbon in those soils. But over time, if you're building carbon through these reduced cultivation systems and you're building up carbon in the top 4 or 5 centimetres of soil where it doesn't tend to be in the full plough layer as such. If you're building up carbon in those circumstances, and you lose the use of glyphosate in 5 or 10 or 10 or 15 years' time, if you're forced to reduce or go back to ploughing, you're releasing a lot of that carbon that you've stored in the top couple of centimetres of soil. So there's that loss there as well. So it depends on which side of the argument you want to come on. And to me, I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember this stage, scutch, when scutch was a big problem on Irish tillage farms, especially spring barley fields. And glyphosate, as it was, or Roundup as it was at the time, was very, very expensive. So you only used them where you really needed to use them. It was generally used around the headlands to keep scutch at bay coming out from ditches and hedges and stuff like that. And if you didn't have it, by God, you knew you had a problem, and you ended up going around, doing multiple cultivations on headlands, trying to roll up scutch before you drilled your crop, and that was no fun, to be honest with you. And generally what happened then is you dried it out and you burnt it, and we don't have that option anymore either. So it will pose a whole heap of new challenges to us, and I suppose conversely, what it could do is it could end up leading us to use more chemistry to try and control the grass weeds that are there.
Yes.
So I'd be an advocate of the judicious use of glyphosate. I don't use it everywhere, but where it's needed, I tend to use it. And I kind of, what's the best way to say it? I justify it in my own mind that it probably reduces down the need for other chemistry that needs to be used if we don't use it. So that's how I justify the use of it,
Would I be right in saying if glyphosate is needed to go with the correct rates, really?
Yes. Yes.
I suppose part of the problem out there is using 1/2 and 3/4 rates.
Yeah. And we're starting to see that issue on certain grass weeds here, that where you use less than the optimum rate of glyphosate, that we are starting to see tolerance to those rates of glyphosate. And in some species, we're seeing, maybe up to having to use over 1,000 grams of active ingredient per hectare, right? And in some cases, that's still kind of, struggling. Like things like rat's tail fescue is a huge problem in some min-till situations. Not all of them by any manner, but where it is a problem, it's a significant problem, and it takes those higher rates of glyphosate to control them. Likewise with Italian ryegrass and certain populations of Italian ryegrass and blackgrass, we're seeing that if you're using the lower rates and maybe some of the generic products as well, and not the Monsanto or Bayer glyphosate as it is now, that they do struggle. So, I know it's a trend, or it has been a trend since glyphosate got expensive there 2 years ago, to reduce your rates. But, you really, really need to be careful of that. Repeated uses of that could lead you into a problem.
Shay, thanks a million.
No problem, lads, anytime.
Cheers, Shay.
All right, lads.
A huge thanks to Shay there for giving up his time to chat with the guys. Very, very interesting episode. Very knowledgeable and great to be always learning and listening to the experts too. Also inside the latest news, that article, How to Make Best Use of Glyphosate, which was on Agriland during the week there by Richard Halloran. That link is also inside the description of the podcast as well if you want to read it. Mind yourselves out there. Farm smart, farm safe.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.